Selections are a very big deal in Photoshop and a really important part of almost any Photoshop project. At some point, you will need to isolate an area of your image or editing or applying a specific effect or adjustment to a particular area. Knowing how to effectively use the available tools and techniques can save you a lot of time. But truly mastering selections in Photoshop can take even years of experience and working with lots of different projects to get to that experience. But here you will get a good foundation how it all works. So it's just an introduction. If you want to learn more about selections, you can visit my YouTube channel, search for PSD Box, and there you will find more tutorials. And I usually just make them show selections on real examples on my photo manipulations, which is what I specialize on. Let's go into the stock images folder and open this image from Pexels. This is our first example, which is going to help us work with some of the tools. As you can see, I have the previous image still opened, and now it's opening on a new tab, and I can switch through them. And as I showed, you can tile them and see them all on the same window, or just consolidate all of them into tabs. Let's close this one. I'm not going to save it. Selections in Photoshop, most of them work based on contrast levels. This is a really contrasty image. We have this really white area. Press Ctrl 1 or Command 1 to zoom it to 100%. You can see that the edges between the two colors are really well defined. This image would be really easy to select. What I mean by select is, for example, remove the red background. It would be really easy to do it because the contrast between the two areas is really well defined. The selection tools that we have in Photoshop are right over here. For example, this one is the rectangular marquee tool, and inside of here we have different shapes. Then we have the slightly more magical or smarter selection tools, like for example the quick selection tool, the magic wand, and also we have the freehand selection tools like the Lasso tool, the Polygonal Lasso tool, or the magnetic Lasso tool. Let's go through all of them and see what they do. Most of them are very intuitive, but there are a lot more advanced selection methods than this one. You can make selections without even using these tools, and I'm going to show you how in just a second. Let's say we want to remove this red background or isolate it so that we can change the color of it. We could use the rectangular marquee tool, for example, and just create a selection from here to here. And you can see we could pretty much isolate this, even though we will lose some of the edges there. This would be a nice way to select it, but we have better ways of doing it. For example, using the magic wand. The magic wand is really simple. It just samples a color and it looks through your image, and it selects the similar colors to the ones that where you clicked. I have the selection active. If I want to deselect, you can press Command D or Control D if you're on Windows. Check the history, so you can see I have now the deselect command here. I can go back and forth. When you select the magic wand tool, you can see that the options bar changes, as I mentioned on the first episode. The sample size, usually I have it to point sample, and I increase the tolerance. The tolerance determines how much the color should vary in order to consider it as the sampled color. In other words, if I click here and I have a really small tolerance, like for example 1, it's just going to select really small bits of image. If I want to have it like to include more colors, I should increase the tolerance. Let's increase it to 20 and click again. You can see that now it includes a lot more colors. Let's increase it even more to about 40 and click again. Now you can see it includes almost everything except this area over here. If I change the sample size from point sample to 3x3 average, what it's going to do is going to sample the color where I clicked and colors around it, and it's going to make an average, and it's going to use that to calculate which color to select. And if I click here again with the same tolerance, you can see that it's going to select slightly more area. If I want to also include this area, I could press and hold the Shift key and check my cursor. It's going to add a plus there, and I can click this arrow which is not selected, and it's going to include that to your selection. And you can see that the marching ends, I'm pressing the space bar, that's why you see the hand icon, and click and drag. You can see that these marching ends now include everything here, the entire red area. Sometimes it's difficult to know if I selected the window or the background, but you can see that now I have the background selected. What I can do with this is use an adjustment. I'm going to talk about adjustments later on, but just for the sake of showing you how to do it, if I click here and choose, for example, hue saturation, I can now change the color of this. Don't worry, I'm going to talk about the layers. This is called a layer mask, and I'm going to talk about this later on. But this is what you can do with selection. Let me delete that, and let me show you another way of selecting things. For example, the quick selection tool. Now, I could use this to select the window. Just click here and drag, and you can see it's going to recognize the change in contrast, and it's keeping the selection inside of this. For this particular image, and given the conditions and how this image looks like, the best option is using the magic wand. I think it's the quickest. And the quick selection tool works better when we have like more of irregular shapes. Let's open another image. Let's open this one. Here we could also use the magic wand, but we can also use the quick selection tool. So I could start painting over the man's body and this flag, and I could easily select it. When I let go, it's going to add a new state here on the history, and I could continue. Sometimes what happens, you can see here, when I get close to the edges and areas like this, it also selected this area in between his legs. We can undo that. First, I want to zoom in by pressing Command 1 or Control 1 and just moving to this area where I want to work, and just reduce the zoom with Option and the mouse wheel. The options here for this tool are plus, minus, and the normal. By default, the normal and plus are the same, but I can also select the minus, and I can also change the size of this. You can see from here, we have the size, the hardness, and the spacing. I'm going to reduce the size, not that much. And just with the minus, click here and start removing that area from my selection. The reason why this is so easy is because we have a really solid background. Selections get really complicated when you have complicated backgrounds with lots of textures, but we have here a really solid color and well-defined edges. You will soon discover that things like hair are really difficult to select. You can see I left out some of this hair, and here I have this area still to select, so I'm going to change back to the normal mode, or actually to the plus mode, and click and just add this area to my selection. One important thing to keep in mind is that you can use several tools to make a selection. For example, I could combine this one with the magic wand. For example, let's undo that part where I extracted the selection from in between his legs. Okay, so I want to exclude this from my selection. I can press Option and minus and click here. This is what happened. It also included parts of his body. The reason for that is because I have the tolerance too high, so it's including this area and the similar colors here, which are really close. So I should first lower the tolerance and try again. Option, because I want to subtract, so I have the minus, click, And it's working well here, but it's also excluding this area from here, which is not what I want. So what can I do? We have one option here, which is called Contiguous. If I check this, what happens is that Photoshop is only looking on the area where I click, and when it encounters any boundaries, in other words, the contrast that is high enough that the tolerance cannot, because of the tolerance, it cannot pass, it's gonna stick to that area. So I'm gonna press Option and click again, and you can see it just kept this here because this color here is way beyond my tolerance here. So it cannot pass because I have the Contiguous option checked. So it's only selecting the contiguous tones within my my tolerance range here, and that's how it works. Now again, I could create a layer mask for this and the background is gone. I'm going to talk about layer masks later on. Let's see some other selection tools. For example, these are the free selection tools. The Lasso tool is just simply used to click and drag and create a free selection by hand. This is not usually used to select objects, but to just create some objects randomly, or like debris or stuff like that. Usually I don't use this. The Polygonal Lasso tool is great for selecting straight objects. For example, I could click here and you can see it just creates straight lines, and when you click it's going to add an anchor point, and you could create a quick selection like this, and you could follow along the edges, and that's it. It's not a really practical tool to select this kind of images. If you double click, it's going to close the selection automatically, or if you just make a few clicks and go back to the last point, it's gonna, you see that circle showing up. When you click, it's gonna close the selection. Another tool is the Magnetic Lasso tool. This is kind of a smart tool here. It's gonna detect the contrast between the images, so I could click here and you can see it's gonna stick, even though I'm moving up, it's gonna stick to that edge because it detects the contrast. And it's also a really quick way to select objects. You can go pretty quick in here, but on some areas it's gonna struggle with it, but you could use this tool. For example, double click to close the selection, and I could now grab the quick selection tool and change the size of it from here and just paint that finger in, and I have my selection ready. So that's how you can combine tools. Really, these are really simple selection methods, but we have more. Let me go back to the other image. I'm going to close this one, and let's go back to this one. We can also make selection based on colors, and there's no tool for that. You have to go into the menus, you have to go into the select menu, and from here you can choose color range. When this panel shows up, you get this eyedropper tool, which if you click on the image, it's gonna sample the color where you clicked, and where you click is the area that is going to be selected, and you can see that the inner part, which is not red, it's not selected. Here you have a preview of your of what you selected. You can see that the top part, which has this, I don't know if you can see it on the video, I'm going to zoom in. You can see that here this part is white, but this one is kind of black, so it's not going to be fully selected. What you can do is you click here. Also, again, you can also click on the thumbnail or on the image on the canvas itself. I want to add this area to the selection. I can press and hold the Shift key. Again, you can see the plus, and I can either sample from here or from here. You will see it better here because we have it on black and white, and where you see that it's not fully white, you can Shift click and it's gonna add that to the selection. Also, you can press and hold and click and drag, and this is going to add those tones to your selection, and you can see the edges with the Alt and the mouse wheel. I can zoom in and you can see the edges, how the selection is done. With the fuzziness, you can increase the range of the colors you select. We also have a few presets, like for example, we can select the reds, the yellows. Since we have no yellows, nothing is selected, that's why it's black. But if I select reds, it's going to select those reds. But you can see that it's not completely white. So it's gonna select a range of reds, but not the entire reds. So if I were to create a layer mask, if I click OK, you will see that the selection looks exactly the same as before. But if I create a layer mask, you will see that the selection, this red is not fully masked. So you actually have a see-through. It's not fully eliminated. That's why it's important to check that. Let me go back to image and color range. Sorry, to select color range. That's why it's important to check this thumbnail and see that it's actually gray. So these presets rarely work. Usually use sample colors and just sample your colors from the image like so, and use the fuzziness if necessary, and that's it. You also can change from the eyedroppers from here to minus and plus, but it's a lot easier if you press the option key, and if you press the control key you will see the image in in RGB. Click OK, and you can see that even now the selection is not fully is not correct, is not fully selected. So again, here we could use the quick selection and make the selection like that. So this is a really basic introduction to selections. There's a lot more advanced. For example, you can use channels, go into each channel and just make selections from here, but this is a lot more advanced. For basic stuff, you can use these tools and just create your selections and fine-tune the edges, which is really important. Later on, when I talk about layer masks, I'm going to show you how to refine those edges and make them look more beautiful. That's all for this episode. On the next episode, I will talk about the layers panel and the layers. The layers panel and layers are really, really important in Photoshop.